Nathaniel Briggs was 41 years old, and until that afternoon, he believed his wife would show up for him the way he had always shown up for her. He had built his construction company from a single truck and a handshake reputation. He had worked through grief, through lean years, through 70-hour weeks, and every time he came home to Dominique. What he did not know was that she had already decided he was not enough. So one afternoon, sitting in his truck outside a half-framed house he was building for someone else's family, Nate made a phone call. He told his wife he had been injured on the job. Possible surgery? Months of recovery. Maybe worse. He waited for her voice to break. Instead, she said, "I cannot be somebody's caretaker. That is not the life I signed up for. I need a partner, Nathaniel, not a project." She hung up first. And in that silence, sitting alone in that truck, Nathaniel Briggs understood exactly what his marriage was, and exactly what he was going to do about it. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The sun hadn't quite broken over Atlanta's skyline when Nate Briggs pulled his truck into the construction site. The early morning air carried the familiar scent of fresh lumber and possibility. He'd always loved this time of day, when the world felt new and full of purpose. His crew was already assembling, their work boots crunching on gravel as they prepared for another day of building something solid, something that would last. Marcus, one of his youngest workers, gave a respectful nod. "Morning, Mr. Briggs." "Morning," Nate replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had earned him respect throughout Atlanta's construction industry. He'd built this company from a single truck and a tool belt, through 14 years of early mornings and late nights, through recession and setbacks and victories. The foundation they'd poured last week had set perfectly. Nate ran his hand along the smooth concrete, checking for imperfections out of habit more than necessity. His crew knew better than to cut corners. They did things right, because that's how he'd taught them, how his father had taught him before passing too young. The morning moved with practiced efficiency. Nate checked the blueprints, coordinated with his foreman about the day's objectives, and watched as the skeleton of what would become someone's dream home took shape, beam by beam. This was his element, where everything made sense, where hard work and attention to detail always yielded results you could touch. Around 10, he decided to call Dominique. The phone rang 4 times before she answered, her voice distracted and slightly irritated. "Hello? Hey, just checking in. You still planning to be home when I get back?" "Oh, right. Yes, I'll be there." She sounded like she was walking somewhere, her heels clicking against hard floor in the background. "I need to go. I'm heading into a meeting." The line went dead before he could respond. Nate looked at his phone for a moment, then tucked it back in his pocket. On his drive home, he passed the florist shop where he'd bought Dominique's wedding bouquet all those years ago. He pulled in without really thinking about it. "The usual, Mr. Briggs?" asked Maria, the owner's daughter. She'd been a teenager when he first started coming here. "Yellow roses," he confirmed. Dominique's favorite. He'd brought them home randomly so many times over the years that Maria didn't even need to ask anymore. The house was empty when he arrived, despite Dominique's assurance she'd be there. The silence felt heavy somehow, different from the usual peace of coming home. He set the flowers in a crystal vase, another anniversary gift from years past, and filled it with water. That's when he noticed her laptop, screen still bright on the kitchen island. He wasn't looking to pry. He never had. But there it was. Impossible to miss. Broderick Whitfield. Dinner tonight confirmed. Wear the blue dress. The blue dress. He'd bought her that dress for their anniversary trip to Charleston 2 years ago. She'd modeled it for him in their hotel room, twirling like a teenager while he watched from the bed, thinking how lucky he was. Nate closed the laptop with a gentle click. No slamming, no cursing, no display of the anger that had started burning low and steady in his chest. He walked to the back porch, eased himself into one of the Adirondack chairs he'd built himself, and let the gathering darkness wrap around him. Through the window, he could see the roses on the counter, yellow against dark granite, bright and ignored. He thought about all the mornings he'd left before dawn to build something for them. All the nights he'd come home late, tired but satisfied, because every brick laid and beam raised was another step toward the life he thought they both wanted. Headlights swept across the driveway, catching in the ornamental trees he'd planted when they first moved in. Dominique's car purred to a stop. Through the window, Nate watched as she collected her things from the passenger seat. Her designer bag, a portfolio he'd never seen before, her phone. The screen lit up her face as she checked it, and something there made her smile. A soft, secret expression he used to think was reserved for him. She walked into the kitchen, still looking at her phone, still wearing that smile. The roses sat there in their crystal vase, yellow petals bright under the kitchen lights. She glanced at them, just for a moment, then walked past without a word, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors he'd installed himself, fading as she headed upstairs. Nate remained on the porch, very still, very quiet, thinking about foundations and how even the strongest ones can develop cracks you don't see until it's too late. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows, catching dust motes in its early rays. Nate stood at the coffee maker, listening to its familiar gurgle while the house stayed quiet around him. He'd been up since 4, though he hadn't needed to be. Sleep had come in fits and starts, his mind cycling through the image of that laptop screen like a blueprint he couldn't quite make sense of. Broderick Whitfield. The name sat heavy in his thoughts. He'd heard it before at church functions, seen it on development signs around Atlanta. A real estate developer with the kind of money that made people remember his name, the kind of money that made people forget their promises. The coffee maker beeped. Nate poured himself a cup, black like always, and leaned against the counter. Upstairs, he could hear Dominique's shower running. She wouldn't be down for at least 30 minutes. Her morning routine was as predictable as a foundation pour. He thought about the blue dress, about Charleston, about how she'd smiled at her phone last night. That soft, secret smile that used to be his. The anger was still there, but it felt different in the morning light. More focused, like when he found a problem on a job site. Not time for emotion, time for assessment. Through the kitchen window, he watched a cardinal land on the feeder he'd hung last spring. Dominique had asked for that feeder, said she loved watching the birds while she had her morning coffee. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen her actually look at it. Over the next 2 days, Nate became a student of his own marriage. He noticed things he'd trained himself not to see. The perfume she wore only when she had committee meetings, something French and expensive he'd given her last Christmas. The way her phone was always face down now, how she angled the screen away when texting. The sudden ends to conversations when he walked into rooms, followed by that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. On the job site, things moved with their usual precision. His crew knew their roles, knew what he expected. Wendell, his foreman of 12 years, noticed something was off. Wendell always noticed. He didn't push, just stayed close, kept the crew running smooth while Nate worked through whatever was eating at him. During lunch break, sitting in the cab of Wendell's truck with sandwiches from the deli down the street, Nate finally spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "Hypothetical." Wendell set down his sandwich, giving Nate his full attention. That was Wendell. Knew when to listen. "If something happened to me, if I couldn't work anymore?" Nate paused, choosing his words carefully. "What do you think Dominique would do?" The silence stretched between them. Wendell looked out at the half-finished house, its beams reaching toward the Georgia sky. When he finally spoke, his words came slow and measured. "She married you when you were building," he said, each word carrying the weight of long observation. "I don't know if she signed up for the rebuilding part." That night, After Dominique said she was having dinner with her women's ministry group, Nate sat in his home office and made a call. Dr. Preston picked up on the third ring. "Nathaniel Briggs," the doctor's warm voice filled the line. "How's that shoulder treating you?" "The shoulder's fine, Preston. I need a favor." Nate's voice was steady. "Not asking you to lie, not asking for false paperwork. Just need some medical language and your silence." Preston was quiet for a moment. They'd grown up in the same South Memphis neighborhood, watched each other build lives from nothing. "What kind of language we talking about? Back injury? Spinal compression? The kind of thing that could end a construction career." Another pause. "This about Dominique? Just need to understand something." The next afternoon, Nate sat in his truck outside the job site. The sun beat down on the hood, making the air conditioning work harder than usual. He held his phone, not rehearsing, not practicing. He knew what he needed to say. He dialed Dominique's number. It rang twice before she answered. "Nathaniel? Aren't you supposed to be at work?" He let his voice shake just slightly. Controlled, like a support beam with exactly the right amount of give. "There's been an accident. Scaffolding collapse." The line crackled with static as Dominique picked up. "Nathaniel? Aren't you supposed to be at work?" His voice trembled just enough, measured like a precise cut. "There's been an accident at the site. Scaffolding collapse. He let the pause stretch, heard her breathing on the other end. "They're saying spinal compression, possible surgery. Could be months of recovery, maybe longer. The doctor's not sure I'll be able to run things like before." The silence that followed wasn't shock, wasn't concern. It was assessment, like someone reviewing numbers that didn't add up to their liking. "So, you won't be able to work." Not a question, a calculation spoken aloud. Nate kept his voice steady, playing the role of a man trying to be brave through pain. "They don't know yet how—" "Nathaniel?" Her voice dropped into something flat and careful, like she was choosing words from a menu. "I'm going to be honest with you because I think you deserve that. I cannot do this. I cannot be somebody's caretaker. That is not the life I signed up for." The words hung between them, sharp as exposed nails. "I love you, but I have to be real. If you can't run the business, if you can't—" She stopped, regrouped. "We are going to have a serious conversation about what this means for both of us. Both of us." A man she believed was lying in a hospital bed, and she'd already made it about both of us. "I hear you," he said. Quiet, even. "I just think we need to be adults about this," she continued, her voice finding its rhythm now, the tone she used in arguments when she believed she was being reasonable. "I've given a lot to this marriage. A lot. And I need a partner, Nathaniel. Not a project. Not a project. 14 years. The house he built them, not as a metaphor, literally laid the foundation with his own hands. He'd worked through his father's death, through a recession, through 2 failed contracts, and a year when they nearly lost everything. Not once had he looked at her and called her a project. "I'll call you when they know more," he said. "Okay," she said. "Let me know." She hung up first. Nate set the phone on the passenger seat. Through the windshield, he studied the half-framed house before him. He thought about how his crew moved on a build, how you could always tell the integrity of a structure by what it did under pressure, whether it held or shifted, cracked, revealed what it was actually made of. He sat there for exactly 11 minutes, watching shadows move across lumber that would become someone else's home. He wasn't devastated. He was confirmed. That evening, he came home wearing a back brace borrowed from the site's first aid supplies. He moved stiffly, carefully, like a man learning the new limitations of his body. Dominique watched from the kitchen island, her face arranged in practiced concern. The next 3 days became a study in revelation. When he mentioned calling his sisters, Dominique touched his arm. "Let's wait until we know more," she said. "No need to worry everyone yet." Translation: No need to create obligations she'd have to manage. Over breakfast, she brought up the business finances, casual, like it had just occurred to her. Maybe we should review everything, she suggested, stirring her coffee, just to understand where things are. In 14 years, she'd never once asked to see the books. The next day, Wendell's text came at 1:47 p.m. Blue dress. Whitfield's Midtown spot. 2 hours. On the third evening, Nate let himself wince badly getting up from the couch. He watched Dominique watch him, saw the moment her eyes shifted from his performance of pain to the window beyond. Her expression changed, subtle, like a blueprint being redrawn. Someone calculating an exit. He'd seen enough. That night, he called Aunt Cora. Not to break down. He was past that now. His voice was steady when she answered. "I need your guest room for a few days," he said. "And I need you to not ask me anything yet." Cora was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've got the key under the mat." A pause. "And, Nathaniel, I told you." He looked at the back brace laid out on his bed, at the empty space in the closet where the blue dress should have been. "I know," he said. Morning light filtered through Aunt Cora's kitchen windows, catching dust motes in its beam. Steam rose from 2 coffee cups between them, hers with cream, his black like always. Nate spread out the evidence of his life's unraveling on her worn oak table. Screenshots of the laptop message, notes from the 3 days of observation, and a small recorder containing his call with Dominique. Cora sat perfectly still, her hands folded, as Nate walked through it step by step. The laptop screen with Whitfield's name, the perfume she only wore certain days, the way she tilted her phone away. Then the test, his carefully constructed lie about the injury, delivered from his truck outside that half-built house. He played the recording. Dominique's voice filled Cora's kitchen. "I cannot be somebody's caretaker. That is not the life I signed up for." Cora's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened slightly around her coffee cup. Nate detailed the 72 hours that followed. Dominique's sudden interest in the business finances, her 2-hour lunch in the blue dress at Whitfield's restaurant, the way she watched him pretend to struggle with pain, calculating, not caring. "She didn't call a single family member," he said quietly. "Didn't research doctors. Didn't even ask which hospital I was supposedly at. Just started laying groundwork for whatever she's planning next." When he finished, the kitchen was silent except for the old clock ticking on Cora's wall. She reached across the table and put her hand over his, warm, steady, like his mother's used to be. "Now," she said, "what do you want to do?" Nate looked at his hands, builder's hands, scarred and strong from years of honest work. "I'm not going to blow up. Not going to confront her today or tomorrow." That's what she'd expect. Me emotional, her in control. He took a slow sip of coffee. "I want to know everything first. How long this has been happening. How deep it goes. How much of what I built she's already promised to someone else. Then," he met Cora's eyes, "then I'm going to take apart everything she's built on my trust. Not with anger, with precision." Cora nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Like dismantling a house." "Foundation up," Nate agreed. "Clean, professional, legal." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd researched the night before. "Yes, I'd like to make an appointment with attorney Phyllis Okafor. Yes, I can be there at 2. Thank you." Next call was to Wendell. "Keep everything running exactly the same," he instructed. "No changes anyone can see. I'll be back on site in a few days." Finally, he texted Dominique. "Doctor referred me to a recovery wellness center. Going to stay there a few days. Get some focused treatment." Her response came quickly. "Okay, good idea. Let me know if you need anything." No questions about which center. No offer to visit. No request for an address. "She didn't even ask where I'll be," he said to Cora. "Because she doesn't want to know," Cora replied simply. Knowing would mean responsibility. At 2 o'clock, Nate sat in attorney Phyllis Okafor's downtown Atlanta office. The space was precise, professional, all clean lines and quiet competence, like a well-planned construction site. Phyllis herself matched her environment. Sharp eyes, carefully pressed suit, the air of someone who had seen every version of betrayal and knew exactly how to handle each one. "Tell me what you know, Mr. Briggs," she said, legal pad ready. Nate reached into his pocket and removed a single sheet of paper. He'd written it out that morning at Cora's table. Every detail, every date, every observation laid out in the same careful hand he used for building specifications. He placed it on her desk. "I need to know everything else," he said. Phyllis's office moved with the quiet efficiency of a well-oiled machine. By Friday morning, the first report from her recommended investigator landed on her desk. 38 pages of documented betrayal, bound in a plain manila folder. Nate sat in her wood-paneled conference room, early sunlight streaming through tall windows as he turned each page with methodical care. The timeline emerged with brutal clarity. 2 years. Not months. Years. The affair had begun in March of 2021, right when Nate was pushing himself to physical limits, trying to land the Westbrook development contract. He remembered those weeks clearly, leaving before dawn, returning after dark, sometimes sleeping on the site office couch because driving home meant losing precious hours. The contract would double their revenue, open doors to bigger projects, secure their future. He'd apologized to Dominique constantly for his absence, promised it was temporary, brought home takeout from her favorite places when he could. Now he knew what she'd been doing with that time. The investigator's work was thorough. Credit card statements showed regular Wednesday lunches at places Nate had never heard of. Hotel receipts under Whitfield's name. Cell phone records revealing thousands of texts, some time-stamped during family dinners, church services, even their nephew's graduation. Then came the page that made Nate's hands go still. Charleston, their 10th anniversary. He'd spent months planning it, coordinating with the historic hotel, arranging the private cooking class she'd always wanted, even hiring a photographer for a sunrise shoot on the beach. Dominique had posted dozens of pictures, called it magical, and the most romantic thing you've ever done, in captions that now felt like evidence rather than memories. The phone records showed 67 texts to Whitfield's number over those 3 days, including several sent at 2 a.m. from their Ocean View suite, while Nate slept beside her, believing he'd given her something special. Nate folded the report closed. His movements were precise, like when he squared up blueprint edges before a presentation. He looked at Phyllis, who had been quietly working at the conference table's far end, giving him space to process. "What do we do first?" he asked. His voice was steady. The steadiness felt dangerous. Phyllis set down her pen. "We document everything. Start separating finances. I'll have paperwork ready by Monday to restructure your business holdings. Completely legal, just strategic timing. Then we build the settlement framework before she knows anything's coming." Nate nodded. The builder in him recognized good project planning. "The investigator is still working," Phyllis continued. "We'll have the full financial picture soon. Any accounts you don't know about. Any joint assets she's leveraged. For now, maintain your routine. Don't give her any reason to accelerate her own plans. Keep wearing the back brace," Nate said. "Keep playing injured." "Exactly." Phyllis's eyes were kind but determined. "You've given us the advantage of time. Let's use it." That evening, Nate eased himself onto their living room couch with the careful movements of someone managing pain. The brace felt like a costume now, a prop in a performance where he was the only one who knew the real script. He'd left Phyllis's office with a folder of his own, but it stayed locked in his truck. Inside the house, he maintained the fiction, wincing slightly when he reached for the TV remote, adjusting his position with deliberate discomfort. Dominique came downstairs in her yoga clothes, fresh from her evening workout. She went to the kitchen without speaking, but returned moments later with a glass of water he hadn't asked for. As she passed behind the couch, her hand brushed his shoulder. a gesture that would have meant something once. "Thank you," he said quietly, taking the water. She smiled, that same smile from all her Charleston photos, and headed back upstairs, probably to text Whitfield about her day. The thought should have hurt more, but Nate found himself oddly calm, like watching a blueprint reveal structural flaws he'd suspected, but couldn't prove until now. Somewhere in Atlanta, Whitfield was probably checking his phone, reading messages from a woman he'd been seeing for 2 years. But Nate knew something they didn't. Every one of those messages was now evidence in a folder downtown, waiting to dismantle the life they thought they were building. He took a slow sip of water and adjusted the brace, playing his part. Above him, he could hear Dominique's footsteps moving across their bedroom floor. He wondered if she was wearing the blue dress tonight. Phyllis's office felt different in afternoon light, less hopeful than morning sun, more suited to hard truths. Nate sat across from her desk as she opened a fresh folder, this one filled with financial records instead of surveillance photos. "The forensic audit is complete," she said, her tone professional but carrying an edge of something like controlled anger. "And I need to show you what we found." She laid out bank statements, transaction histories, and LLC registrations in neat rows. The documents told a story that made the affair seem almost secondary, a parallel betrayal built with numbers instead of hotel rooms. "Over the past 14 months, Phyllis began, Dominique has systematically redirected funds from your joint home renovation account. Small transfers at first, nothing that would trigger immediate attention. But the total comes to $31,000. Nate studied the statements. He recognized the account. They'd opened it specifically for updating the back room Dominique had talked about turning into her reading space. He'd added to it faithfully every month, imagining built-in bookshelves and a window seat she'd said she always wanted. "The money went here," Phyllis continued, sliding forward another statement. "A personal savings account at Greater Georgia Credit Union. Opened in her name only, with paperwork specifically requesting no paper statements be mailed to your home address." The account balance showed regular deposits, not just from the renovation fund, but from other sources Nate didn't recognize. She'd been building it steadily, methodically. "But here's where it gets interesting," Phyllis said, pulling out property records. "We cross-referenced the account activity with real estate transactions connected to Broderick Whitfield's various LLCs. One payment in particular stood out. $8,500 transferred 3 months ago to New Horizon Properties, LLC. She pushed forward a deed filing. New Horizon is a shell company Whitfield created 6 months ago. Its only asset is a luxury condominium unit in Buckhead. The $8,500 matches exactly to the standard deposit requirement for that building." Nate looked at the address. The Astor, one of Atlanta's most exclusive residential towers. The kind of place that appeared in lifestyle magazines and real estate shows. The kind of place Dominique had always said she deserved to live in. She wasn't just seeing him, Nate said quietly. She was planning an exit. A very carefully structured one, Phyllis confirmed. "The timing suggests she was waiting to understand your financial position post-injury before making any final moves. Your disability would have affected the asset split calculations significantly. So when I called about the fall, it likely accelerated her timeline. She probably saw it as an opportunity to maximize her position in the settlement." Phyllis's voice carried professional admiration despite the circumstances. "She's not unsophisticated in this. The account structuring, the property arrangements. She understood exactly what she was doing." Nate stood and walked to the window. Downtown Atlanta spread out below, glass towers catching late afternoon sun. Somewhere in that skyline was the Astor, waiting for his wife with its promise of elevation, literal and social. "The good news," Phyllis said, "is that documented financial diversion of this scale dramatically strengthens our position. The affair is one thing. Hidden accounts and diverted joint assets are another entirely." Nate nodded. He pulled out his phone. "I need to make a call." he said. Phyllis gathered the documents. Take your time. I'll be in my office when you're ready to discuss next steps. In the hallway, Nate dialed Wendell. His friend picked up on the second ring. You got a minute? Nate asked. For you? Always. Nate told him everything. The affair timeline, the hidden account, the Buckhead condo, waiting like a reward for betrayal. Wendell listened in complete silence. When Nate finished, the silence stretched another moment. Then, tell me what you need. 4 words, carrying the weight of 15 years of friendship and trust. No judgment, no platitudes, just pure utility. The same way Wendell approached every challenge on their job sites. Right now, just keep the cruise moving. Keep everything looking normal from the outside. Done, Wendell said. Anything else? Anytime. Just say the word. Nate ended the call and drove home through Atlanta traffic, the familiar route feeling somehow foreign. The house came into view, the house he'd built, that they'd chosen the design for together, that held 14 years of what he'd thought was a shared life. He pulled into the driveway and walked past the unfinished backroom addition. The windows were framed but not installed yet, tarp still covering the opening. He'd planned to surprise her with custom shelving, thinking about how she'd smile when she saw it. He kept walking, not stopping to look. Behind him, the tarp rustled slightly in the evening breeze, like something trying to get his attention. He didn't turn around. Morning arrived with unusual clarity. Nate woke before dawn, his mind already moving through the day's checklist, with the same precision he brought to complex build schedules. Today was about structure, creating the framework that would protect everything he'd built before Dominique could leverage it against him. He arrived at his lawyer's office by 7. Phyllis had the business restructuring documents ready, having worked through them the previous evening. Everything here is completely legitimate, she assured him, spreading the papers across her desk. We're just formally documenting ownership structures that should have been clarified years ago. Nate read through each page carefully. The language was precise, establishing clear separation between marital assets and business holdings, protecting his crew's jobs and ongoing contracts from any potential disruption. He signed where indicated, his signature as steady as ever. The mortgage company next, Phyllis said, handing him another folder. This puts them on notice of potential legal proceedings. It prevents any sudden changes to the loan structure without both parties' awareness. By 9, he was sitting in a leather chair at Atlanta First Mortgage, speaking quietly with a loan officer he'd known for years. The man's expression remained professional, but Nate caught the flash of understanding in his eyes as he filed the paperwork. Another piece secured. The drive to Aunt Cora's church took 20 minutes. The building sat empty mid-morning, sunlight streaming through stained glass. But Pastor Aldridge was in his office as expected. The pastor looked up from his desk as Nate entered, and something in his expression suggested he'd been waiting for this conversation. "Nathaniel," he said warmly, rising to shake hands, "what brings you by?" Nate sat down, choosing his words carefully. "Pastor, I need to make you aware of something, not to take sides, just to be available when certain things come to light." The pastor's face remained neutral, but his eyes carried a weight of understanding. "I've known you and Dominique a long time," he said quietly. "Yes, sir, you have. And I've observed. More than perhaps either of you realized." Nate met his gaze. "Then you won't be entirely surprised by what's coming?" Pastor Aldridge folded his hands on his desk. "No," he said simply. "I won't be." He paused. "I've watched Dominique move through this community for years, seen how she positions herself, how she manages perceptions." Another pause. "I've prayed about when and whether to speak. I'm not asking you to speak, Pastor. Just to be present when the time comes. I'll be there," the pastor said. No hesitation. Back home, Nate waited until Dominique left for her weekly hair appointment before going through their bedroom. He needed his original business formation documents, papers from 14 years ago when he'd first incorporated. The search led him to her jewelry box, and there it was, his mother's ring. The simple gold band caught the light, familiar as his own heartbeat. He remembered placing it on Dominique's finger at their wedding, his voice thick with emotion as he explained its significance. His mother, gone too soon to see him married, present through this small circle of gold. Dominique had cried, called it perfect, worn it proudly that day. Now it sat in her jewelry box, untouched for who knew how long. Nate closed the lid without taking it. Not yet, but soon. That evening, Dominique approached him as he sat carefully on the couch, still maintaining his injury performance. "Baby," she said, her voice carrying practiced concern, "I've been thinking. We should get away this weekend. Somewhere quiet, just us. Focus on your recovery and reconnect." Nate looked up at her, seeing now how she calibrated her expression, managed her tone. "That sounds nice," he said evenly. "I'll look for a cabin rental." "I can do it," she started. "No, let me. You're already doing so much." He pulled out his phone and booked the first available property he found. He would never see the inside of it. Later, at Aunt Cora's kitchen table, his aunt poured coffee and looked at him with eyes that had seen generations of hard truths. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly, "about my first marriage." Nate stilled. In all his years, she'd never spoken of this. "I was 22, she began. He was charming, successful, seemed like everything I'd been taught to want. 2 years in, I found out he had a whole other life built on what he'd taken from me. Money I didn't know was missing. Dreams he'd used up while feeding me smaller ones." She reached across the table, took Nate's hand. "What happened to you wasn't a character flaw. It was theft. The thief carries the shame, not you." Nate squeezed her hand, let the words settle into his bones. That night, in Cora's guest room, he slept without dreams, the deep rest of a man who knows exactly what comes next. The morning arrived with unusual stillness. Nate woke at 5, his body already alert, mind clear. For 2 weeks, he'd been moving carefully, performing pain and limitation. Today, that ended. He made coffee in the dark kitchen, watching dawn creep across the granite countertops he'd installed himself 3 years ago. The house felt different now, less like a home, more like a stage set about to be struck. He touched the familiar surfaces one last time. The kitchen island where he'd first seen Whitfield's name on her laptop, the back door he'd rehung last summer, the window trim he'd custom-cut to match the original 1940s woodwork. The back brace sat on the counter where he'd left it last night. He picked it up, felt its weight, not just the physical mass of it, but the weight of everything it represented. The test, the revelation, the quiet, methodical weeks of preparation that followed. He set it aside deliberately. He wouldn't need it again. Standing straight felt like shedding a skin. His body remembered its natural posture, shoulders settling back, spine aligning. He rolled his neck, stretched his arms overhead. No more performance, no more pretense. The coffee maker finished its cycle. He poured the first cup, adding cream the way he always had. Some habits weren't worth breaking just because everything else was about to change. Steam rose from the mug as he checked his phone. 6:45 a.m. He texted Aunt Cora first. "Ready when you are." Her response came immediately. "On my way. Love you, nephew." The next text went to Phyllis. 8:30, park where we discussed. "Already en route," she replied. "Documents in order." Finally, he called Wendell. His friend answered on the first ring, voice steady. "Morning, boss. You good to do this?" "Been ready." Trucks warmed up. Nate nodded to himself. "See you soon, then." He moved through the kitchen with deliberate calm, gathering what he needed. 3 manila folders emerged from his briefcase, each one labeled in his precise handwriting. Timeline, financials, property records. He laid them on the kitchen table in sequence, their corners aligned perfectly, the same way he squared lumber on a job site. His phone came next, face up on the table. He opened his voicemail, scrolled to the saved message, let his thumb hover over the play button. Dominique's voice waited there, preserved in digital amber. "Once we know what the injury settlement looks like, we can move." He'd listened to it exactly once when the investigator first brought it to him. Once had been enough. 7:30. He made a second cup of coffee, this one black. The morning light had filled the kitchen now, touching everything with unusual clarity. Through the window, he saw Wendell's truck pull up, park quietly in the driveway. His friend remained in the driver's seat, a steady presence. Aunt Cora arrived at 8:15, letting herself in with her spare key. She wore her Sunday dress, navy blue, pressed sharp, and carried herself with the particular dignity of a woman who had seen this coming and waited patiently for others to catch up. She sat at the table without speaking, folded her hands, and nodded once at Nate. Phyllis's black sedan appeared at 8:25, parking precisely where they'd planned, visible from the kitchen window, but not immediately obvious from the driveway. She stayed in her car, briefcase ready on the passenger. The house settled into waiting. Nate heard movement upstairs, Dominique's familiar morning routine, shower running, drawers opening and closing, the specific creak of the floorboard by her vanity. He thought about the cabin he'd booked for their recovery weekend getaway. Somewhere in the North Georgia mountains, a rental property manager was probably wondering why their confirmed guests hadn't arrived yesterday. He'd paid the deposit with cash, let it go. Footsteps on the stairs now. The specific cadence of Dominique descending, wrapped in her silk robe, expecting another morning of managing her injured husband's limitation. The sound paused briefly. She must have spotted Aunt Cora through the kitchen doorway. "What is Cora doing here?" Nate turned from the window, met her eyes directly for the first time in weeks. "Sit down, Dominique," he said quietly. "I'm done with the injury." Dominique sank into the kitchen chair, her silk robe settling around her like expensive water. Her eyes darted between the manila folders, their corners aligned with architectural precision, and Nate's straight posture, the careful curve of pain she'd grown accustomed to completely absent. "What is this?" she asked, but her voice suggested she already knew. Nate opened the first folder. 2 years, he said quietly. "While I was securing the Westbrook contract, 70-hour weeks, remember? You started meeting Broderick Whitfield for lunch." He slid a page across the table. The first one was March 15th. Le Petit Marché. You wore red. Dominique's face tightened. "You had me followed?" "No," Nate said. "I had the truth documented. There's a difference." He opened the second folder. 14 months ago, you started moving money. Small amounts at first. 500 here, 1,200 there. Always from the renovation account, the one for the reading room you said you wanted. He placed bank statements in front of her, transactions highlighted in precise yellow lines. "It adds up to $31,000. I can explain." "The explanation is in the third folder," Nate continued, his voice level. $8,500. Deposit on a Buckhead condo through Whitfield Shell Company. Another document slid across the table. You were building an exit, while I was building us a home. Dominique's posture shifted, defensive anger replacing initial shock. "You were never here, Nathaniel. Always at work, always at job sites. Working to fund the life you said you wanted?" Nate's words were precise, measured. "But that's not why we're here. We're here because 2 weeks ago, I called you from what you thought was a hospital. Remember what you said?" She looked away. "Let me remind you," Nate said. "I cannot be somebody's caretaker. That is not the life I signed up for. I need a partner, Nathaniel, not a project." The words filled the kitchen, bouncing off surfaces he'd installed himself. "You said that to a man you believed was injured and alone. I was scared." Dominique tried. I wasn't thinking clearly. You were thinking exactly clearly. For the first time, you said exactly what you meant. Nate's calm was absolute. The injury was a test. I needed to see what you'd do when you thought I couldn't provide any more. Color drained from Dominique's face. You faked. Everything since then has been performance, he confirmed. Watching you calculate your exit while pretending to care. This is ridiculous, Dominique pushed back. You're taking everything out of context. Yes, I had lunch with Broderick. Yes, I saved some money. Any financial advisor would tell you to have your own accounts. But this conspiracy you've built. The documents aren't a conspiracy. They're a timeline. Nate's finger tapped the folders. Every lunch, every hotel, every transfer. While I was surprising you with that anniversary weekend in Charleston, the one you posted all over Instagram, you were texting him from our hotel room. Dominique shifted strategies, her voice softening. Baby, listen, whatever you think is happening, we can work through this. Couples counseling, time away together. Like the cabin I booked, Nate asked quietly. The recovery weekend you suggested? She reached for his hand. He didn't move. I love you, Nathaniel. Broderick means nothing. Nate picked up his phone, pressed play. Dominique's voice filled the kitchen. Once we know what the injury settlement looks like, we can move. The silence that followed was complete. Aunt Cora hadn't moved once. Nate took out his phone, sent a single text. The front door opened. Phyllis Okafor entered, elegant and purposeful in a charcoal suit. Good morning, she said, placing a leather portfolio on the table. I'm attorney Phyllis Okafor. These are divorce papers. Dominique stared at Nate. You planned all of this. I build things, Nate said simply. I know how to read a foundation. Yours was never solid. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed his mother's ring, the one he'd given Dominique at their wedding. He looked at it for a moment, then tucked it back in his pocket. This stays with me. Without another word, he walked to the front door. Through the window, Wendell's truck idled in the driveway, his friend's steady presence waiting. Nate stepped out into the morning light and didn't look back. Behind him, Dominique sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by the precise documentation of her choices. Phyllis settled into the chair across from her, opening the portfolio with practiced efficiency. Aunt Cora's chair was already empty. On the counter, the flowers from 2 weeks ago stood dead in their vase, dried petals scattered like evidence around the base. 6 weeks after the morning in the kitchen, Nate sat in Phyllis Okafor's office, reviewing the final settlement documents. The papers spread across her mahogany desk told a story of precision and consequence. The financial diversion documentation was key, Phyllis said, tapping a highlighted section. Once we established the pattern of funds being redirected without your knowledge, her leverage essentially disappeared. She turned a page. The business is completely protected. We've structured it so there's no possible claim on future contracts or current assets. Nate nodded, signing where indicated. His signature was steady. The house will sell, Phyllis continued. The split is fair, but weighted in your favor given the circumstances. She's not contesting. She knows what we have. Outside the office windows, Atlanta's downtown skyline stretched against a clear autumn sky. Nate thought about how many of those buildings he'd worked on over the years, each one a testament to careful planning and solid foundations. The ripples spread quickly through Atlanta's professional circles. One of Whitfield's previous targets, a medical supply company owner whose wife had left him 3 years ago, filed a civil action after being contacted by Nate's investigator. The lawsuit detailed a pattern. Whitfield's pursuit of married women followed by suspicious contract acquisitions after their divorces. The Atlanta Business Chronicle ran a small but devastating piece on predatory relationship patterns in development circles. Whitfield's phone stopped ringing quite so often. Dominique moved into the Buckhead condo on a Wednesday. She'd posted a cryptic but pointed Instagram caption about new beginnings and living authentically. 3 weeks later, She was still waiting for Whitfield to help furnish the space, as promised. His calls became shorter, his excuses more frequent. The development world was complicated right now, and he needed to focus on damage control. At Antioch Baptist, Pastor Aldridge handled the inevitable questions with measured grace. When Sister Jenkins asked after service what had happened with that nice Briggs couple, the pastor simply said, "Nate is a good man who experienced a profound betrayal. He's moving forward with his integrity intact." The weight of what he didn't say spoke volumes. Dominique's carefully constructed social position began to shift. The women's ministry leadership quietly reorganized without her. The annual gala committee filled her chair. No one was unkind, they simply stopped calling. The invitations slowed, then stopped. Her Instagram followers dropped by half. 14 months unfolded, like blueprints becoming buildings. Nate's company secured the West End contract, a mixed-use development that would bring affordable housing and black-owned businesses to a historic Atlanta neighborhood. The kind of project he'd dreamed about when he was younger, back when one truck and a tool belt were his whole operation. He had his mother's ring cleaned and redesigned, a simple pendant on a sturdy chain he wore under his shirts, close to his heart, where it belonged. Sunday dinners at Aunt Cora's became his weekly anchor. She made his mother's cornbread recipe and never said, "I told you so." Petra came into his life through a routine bid meeting, a civil engineer with 20 years of experience and no patience for games. She challenged his initial site drainage plan, proved her point with data, and smiled when he admitted she was right. Their first date was coffee, that turned into lunch, that turned into dinner. She showed up when she said she would. She asked direct questions and gave honest answers. She didn't perform affection. She offered it, steady and real. "The thing about foundations," she said one evening, looking over plans with him, "is that they tell you everything if you know how to read them." Nate looked at her then, really looked, and felt something solid shift into place. Now, standing on the West End project's rooftop at dusk, Nate watched Atlanta's lights flicker to life. The city stretched out before him, familiar skyline, new perspective. Wendell's footsteps crunched on the roofing material as he approached. "You see, Dominique's Instagram went private," Wendell said, coming to stand beside him. "I don't have Instagram," Nate replied simply. Wendell laughed. "Buckhead ain't what she thought it was gonna be." Nate nodded, feeling the weight of his mother's ring against his chest. He took out his phone and dialed Petra's number. She picked up on the second ring. "You still coming Sunday?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, watching the city lights brighten against the deepening sky. "I'll be there." He meant it. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.